Hello, and welcome to Sacred Herbalism, the full moon segment of the Elder Tree podcast, where we explore how plants can support us to enter into a sacred relationship with life and the living world. I'm Stephanie Hazel, and I've recorded this episode beneath the gaze of epic Wollumbin, where I live in Bundjalung country, and I pay my respects to the First Nations people of this land, as well as to the spirits and plants of this ancient earth. If you love what we do, you can support the Elder Tree mission of putting medicine in the hands of the people by joining our Patreon, where you can access special teachings from our presenters and our interviewees. So, let's walk into the moonlit forest together. Are you ready? This full moon, as we move into the year of the wood dragon, I get to interview my favourite fire dragon, Jimi Wollumbin, the one and only. This episode, we tackle a question that has been on my mind for a while now. How do we bring the sacred into our practice of herbal medicine in the clinic room with our clients? You know, we have all these beautiful experiences of connecting with the sacred in ourselves and with life through plants as allies, as friends, connecting with the plant world, and that can be very rich for us in our individual journeys, and also very rich for our connection to plants and our understanding and knowledge and wisdom of plants as medicines. But how do we weave that back in to support our clients to also be having a transformative experience of the sacred as part of their healing journey? And who better to answer such a tangly, difficult question as the poetic and very experienced clinically Jimi Wollumbin. If you want to go deeper into your clinical work and be able to provide more meaningful transformations for your clients, bringing all of yourself, your soul, your spirit, and your relationships with the plants into the clinical space, then both Jimi and I have beautiful opportunities to study with us this year. Jimi has a monthly apprentice lounge that's available through his Patreon, and I'm offering a 4-month initiation called the Wild Edge of Herbalism starting mid-March. Links to both of these are in the show notes. Hey there, Jimi. Good afternoon, and it's so fun to have you here in the podcast again.
It's a pleasure to be back.
And we're just recording this down the road from each other, so that's really nice to be back in the hood.
Yes.
Back in UK.
Yes, surrounded by all of this green wisdom.
Oh, yeah, I've been really noticing the way that the beauty of the natural world around me and the vibrancy of nature, being back in this incredible subtropical lush environment full of forests and mountains, does all this kind of invisible support work for my mental health. And I'd never noticed it before because I grew up in really lush environments and really verdant places. And I noticed when I moved to Melbourne, and you know, Melbourne's great in all these ways, but there was this discourse in my friends of everyone saying things like, oh, yeah, I really need to do X to manage my mental health, or journaling is really important to managing my mental health, or I always take a day a month to and managing mental health was a discourse in my social world that it just hadn't been. And after a while, I remember thinking, like, oh, that's weird. I never do anything to manage my mental health. It's always just kind of good. And after years of living in an urban environment, I started to have that same need.
Yes, it's like a rabbit in a small cage. You know, it's a eco deficiency. It's a sick building. It's a sick environment. The urbanization, you know, and our need for the medicine that is not just excuse me, not just imbibed orally, but absorbed and assimilated osmotically.
Yeah. And, you know, there's all this interesting research coming out now about how being in green spaces downregulates the nervous system, and even looking at multiple shades of green at the same time does something to the way that our fight or flight and our amygdala are acting. And that's interesting research, but we almost don't need the research, right? It's like we've evolved to live in wild landscapes. And so when we live in wild landscapes, we are in greater health and harmony. You know?
And we could add to that theme with this podcast. We have evolved to live in sacred landscapes, immersed in the sacred, swimming in the sacred, constantly osmotically absorbing the sacred. And there's less of that in an urban environment than there is in the cathedral of the rainforest where we currently live.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you've read the beautiful book by Francis Weller called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. It's about grief.
No, I haven't.
It's a beautiful book. I've just read like the first half and just got so much out of it. Picked it up at a friend's house. And he talks about the different gates of grief. And one of the gates of grief that he actually added quite late in his exploration of grief is the special kind of grief we have for the things we were born expecting and didn't receive. I'll say that again. The special kind of grief that we feel for the things we were born expecting and have not received.
Yes, beautiful. And that, in so many ways, is soul, the world soul, the soulfulness of which we are primed to, walk the song lines. And yet when we walk through an urban environment, soul is there too, soul is there too, but it hits us. We are primed. We have receptors, like the bitter receptors that we have in our heart and brain and tongue and gut. We have these anima receptors that are studded across us like the patterns on a butterfly's wings. That means that why we are so primed for forest bathing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's that, like, we were born expecting that kind of forest bathing, but I think there's also another aspect where we were born expecting social and cultural structures and habits, rituals that support us to constantly reorient ourselves towards a kind of sacred relationship with life.
Yes.
The songs and stories
Yes.
that remind us that we're
Absolutely.
part of this and that we belong and that we are custodians. And in an interview with
Yes.
John Seed about deep ecology, he said something around, we make the mistake in the West of thinking that we're the only ones who get caught up in our mind and disconnected. He's like, no, that's part of the human condition. We've just lost the structures and the rituals that all humans need to help us come back out of our brain and into relationship.
Yes. Yes. I was at my daughter's first poetry slam the night before last, and the facilitator, in honouring the Indigenous custodians of the land, said one of the things that they remind us is that art and poetry and myth and storytelling and creativity are not asides or pluses to culture and life. They are the marrow, and for a functioning whole human communion, we must be immersed in this, because there can be no health in an unhealthy culture. And so, like trying to medicate ourselves out of, using drugs or herbs, a dis-ease, a soulful dis-ease that has structurally poured into us, right? Through all of these social structures, their absence or their overbearing presence is fundamental to the basic dis-ease that we are encountering. It's not just toxicology that is creating ill health in human beings, but it's that absence of the sacred, right? And that sacred is engaged through the sacred art of storytelling that reminds us who we are and weaves meaning. And so that deep fundamental disease of modernity, the crisis of crises, right? It's like we have an ecological crisis, yes, but we also have an economic crisis. We have a gender crisis. We have a political crisis. We have a healthcare crisis. We have an educational crisis. And underneath all of that is now we're starting to language this as the meaning crisis, right? And so it's these processes that weaves the meaning, that the soul, as John Seed was saying, has always thirsted for, as self-reflective, self-aware beings. We need these medicines, right? We need these medicines so deeply. And it is very possible for herbal medicine to be practiced in a way where it does not meet those needs at all, where herbs are used as drugs and they are alternatives to antidepressants or antibiotics, and they are used as herbal antibiotics. They are our sense, our fundamental notion of what a medicine is has been co-opted, right, from all of these medicines that we speak of. The medicine of song, the medicine of dance, the medicine of communion, the medicine of the sweat lodge, right? Including the medicine that is instantiated by yarrow and betony and all of these things, right? And so, yes,
What does
that's perhaps
instantiated mean?
taking a transcendent and archetypal force and giving it form and making it realize and present in the world, right? And so herbs are instantiating, right, archetypal forces that were there in the universe before them. They capture them like, they capture light. And so time captures Mars, as Culpeper would language it, right? Time captures Mars, but Mars was already there. And Mars was already there before the planet Mars was already there. Mars is there, and the strong nuclear force, and all of these things, right? And so one of the tragedies of the modern herbalist, let's keep it to the herbalist, is that they are attempting to medicate and heal a dis-ease which is structurally maintained, right, which is larger than us in this collective patterns. And so when herbal medicine is used as herbal antibiotics and herbal antidepressants, then really herbal medicine in that instance is contributing to the desacralization of the world. And we could language on this podcast that the primary illness that our culture is suffering from is that we have desacralized, we have desouled, deanimated the cosmos at large, whereas we are primed, desanctified. We are primed to relate to a world, a cosmos ensouled. Right? It's not just plants that are ensouled. It's boulders and rivers and song and weather. It is all animate. It all has animus. It all has soul. And so the practice of herbal medicine in Australia, as I generally encounter it, right, in naturopathic medicine, is just alternatives to drugs, which are things to band-aid and solve symptoms. Right?
Yeah, I have an example of that this morning.
Addressing that.
I have an example of that this morning where a friend of mine visiting, and she recently had shingles, and she's like, oh, I was taking your ViroClear formula. So it's a formula that I made specifically for COVID after reading lots of the reports coming out from the Chinese herbalists in China, in the hospitals, and also looking at Stephen Harrod-Bunis protocol. And the primary herb is sweet wormwood, Artemisia annua, which, we know as herbalists is definitely the primary herb for the kind of COVID that we've been seeing in the last couple of years. And I called it ViroClear because, you don't want to have a product on a shelf that says COVID, because that's problematic and you're probably going to get in trouble for that. And this friend of mine was like, oh, no, it's great. I love it. I had shingles. I also get lots of cold sore. So I've just been taking it all the time. And it's this interesting application of, she's like, well, COVID's a virus and you made it, it's an antiviral, right? So I'll just take it for any virus that I have. And she's not a herbalist. She's, a beautiful member of my social world. But just seeing the way that we as a culture have understood medicine and what healing is, and that the essence of healing is killing the thing that's hurting you. It's an anti-something.
Yes.
It's an antifungal, an antiviral, an antibiotic, an anti-inflammatory.
The vanquishing of suffering.
Yeah, that then the
Yes.
vanquishing of suffering. So, or it's an anti-inflammatory, or an, it's always about stopping something that we're seeing as the culprit.
Yes.
And absolutely herbs
Yes.
are used that way. And it's interesting that when I first started in practice, I noticed myself taking on my clients' expectations, that I would
Yes.
somehow find the magic formula in one or maybe two sessions that would solve all the problems that they had spent 20 years cultivating, that every other
Yes.
doctor they'd been to hadn't been able to solve, and that I would somehow make this perfect formula and put all the different herbs in to deal with all of their symptoms and problems, and they wouldn't have to actually deeply engage with the practice of healing, the process of healing.
Yes, yes, and with that, another layer on top of that, the misuse of herbs, the co-opting and the desanctifying of herbs in that way is that person with shingles is like our current Western understanding of shingles is that, you know, the chickenpox virus hides, from our eyes in the nervous system, and then underneath duress comes out, right? And so perhaps the duress that that person has been experiencing is, let's keep it simple, anxiety. And the medicine that they required, when you looked at the total pictures and the patterns that were going on, was kava, right? And it's not an antiviral herb at all, because that prescription, that person is still using that symptomatically.
Mm.
It's an anti-symptomatic medicine. Make the symptom disappear, but the core pattern remains unseen and unchanged. And so it's an attempt to say, don't make me change. I just want to continue on in my wounded way, in my wounded culture, but just make the symptoms of the dis-ease of my soul in my unhealthy culture vanish. Take it
Mm.
away, right? And so the prescription may not even be effective because it's not actually pattern matched to or
Mm.
individually formulated towards that person's. That's a symptom of anxiety in that person, and in this person is a symptom of some other thing, right? And so, like that antiviral formula in that instance, the way in which it is used can be really enabling of the deep pathology of our culture. Like, it has that potential. It also has the potential not to be, but it can be misused in that way.
Mm. Yeah, I think that brings us to this question that I really want to explore with you, which is around the process of healing itself. And as a clinician, as a herbalist or a naturopath working with clients, what is the importance or the role of the sacred inside that healing container? In this podcast, we've talked a lot about how plants can be sacred, how plants can support us to open our eyes and experience the sacredness that is always there, like gateways to sacred consciousness or awareness. But yeah, there's a lens I'd love to explore with you. I know you have a lot of clinical experience, and in our conversations before, I feel like you've really spoken about the kind of, you haven't said sacredness, but the kind of deeply meaningful work of the healing journey and the healing container and the transformation that can happen for people.
Yes, yes. So I guess where I go first with this is that we must begin with something like a definition of health, right? What is health? If we are trying to steer ourselves, our culture, and our patients towards health, then what is health? Now, despite the World Health Organization in its particularly glorious phase having defined health as not the absence of disease, right, but a dynamic state of social, physical, and emotional well-being.
Yeah.
Health is not the absence of disease, but health is well-being. Then the question is begged, what is well-being? So it's
Mm-hmm.
almost not answered by the definition. Then for that reason, the definition that I use with my clients is instead, health is not the absence of disease, but the roaring presence of soul, right? And so if this is our goal, right, which is in deep accordance with our tradition, then uh, then then we are immediately plunged into the sacred. For what is the sacred if not soul itself, right? And so then our goal is not the vanquishing of symptoms, right? But soul making. And when we vanquish symptoms, right? So those symptoms can be psychological symptoms. We can vanquish grief. We can vanquish depression with MDMA or something, or an antidepressant. We can vanquish these things. We can vanquish it with alcohol and distraction and all of these things. Then in vanquishing symptoms, we at times we run the risk of vanquishing soul, because the symptoms are the soul's expression, right? The soul, the body sheds the tears that the soul could never weep, right? And so in these ways, we have a fundamental restructuring and revisioning about what healing is and what is the purpose of a human life, right? And so when we say that it is soul making, then we are coming back to that sense of to heal, to make whole, right? To make whole. And to make whole in this way is for the soul to understand its part in the world soul, that it was always continuous, right? It was always continuous with that larger sanctity, that larger anima, that animism of an animate cosmos, that it was always whole. It was always a part of this. And one of the ways in which that takes place is through suffering and through illness, right? So the vanquishing of symptoms is a terrible disservice. It's like trying to make menopause disappear, or trying to make a midlife crisis disappear, or trying to make depression or grief disappear, or wanting your children to not have any suffering or strife or heartache. What a terrible thing to wish upon your children. What a terrible thing to wish upon your children, right? And so this is how deep the pathology is of our culture that creeps into our practice in the West of herbal medicine, right? It creeps in at every single level.
I have so much excitement hearing the beautiful description that you've given there of the roaring presence of soul, and the body sheds the tears that the soul could never cry. I think is a really powerful way to get people to really embrace their symptoms and their challenges, and to see them as friends to work with and to express and to discover and be curious about.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting actually what you just said at the end. I remember having quite a big argument with my own mother about 10 years ago. I was, going through a divorce. I had a lot of life changes going on. And there was this thing, I had this fundamental sticking point in this conversation we were having. And I had this moment of realization of that exact thing of being like, oh, you have somehow believed the lie that our society tells, that if you do everything right as a mother, like everything, that I will somehow find a path that I can walk that is free from suffering.
Yes.
They were the
And
exact
bless her,
words.
but
Yeah.
yes,
And that their
yes,
feeling of like,
but
oh, I
what
failed as a
what a
mother
terrible thing.
because my child is suffering. And you're not making the
Yes,
right choice because you're suffering. That's a really interesting
yes.
one too. And,
And
and to
so,
be like, no, actually, I'm in so much pain right now, but it is a growthful, soulful, liberating pain.
yes,
And would
it
you
is
go
soul
back
making.
through history,
It,
and would you, as a lover of art, I'm like, would you make all of Van Gogh's pain go away and then deprive the whole world of his art? Would you make all of the
yes,
great art and beauty and literature and creation that's come from hardship, would you make that disappear and deprive the world of all those things to remove the suffering from those people? That's what we're talking about, right? Through our
sacred
pain.
melancholy.
Sacred
Yes,
melancholy.
sacred melancholy. Yes, is what it is, right? And and here's again, I think I spoke last time to you about my deep grief for the loss of the Western tradition in so many ways, that it's the most interrupted and wounded tradition of these big five herbal healing traditions that have been codified in these particular ways: Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, Tibetan medicine, Mongolian medicine, Hippocratic medicine, right? That these other ones, they remain in, there's a continuity through those big traditions, right? Of course, there's indigenous traditions as well, and they have their different mix of continuity and interruption. But with the interruption of our tradition, then we're like those indigenous people who the last elder that spoke their language and sung their songs has died. And so instead, what we have is we are left with the plants, and thank goodness we are left with the plants, right? But the language around which those plants were sung forth and utilized is gone. And so if you ask a Western herbalist, Culpeper says this herb is good for the melancholic humor, and all of its symptoms, they will know more about vata or more about yin or yang than they will about melancholy, about black bile, right? And so inside there, then there's this piece of like, well, how do you say yin and yang in the West? And we have a tradition of that. And it's tied to the same healer mage, the sorcerer magician Empedocles, who gave us the four elements. And above the four elements sits these two primordial forces of the universe. And these two primordial forces are not termed the sunny and shady sides of a mountain like yin and yang, right? But they're called love and strife. Strife. And it's not good and bad, right? Strife. Empedocles constantly sings forth mad strife, right? Challenge, chaos, disruption as a liberating force, right? And so the loss of this language means that we are practicing in the ruins of the Tower of Babel. We are practicing, there's this deep grief that we experience in the West for the loss of our sacred tradition, that our herbal tradition, our Hippocratic tradition is older than the Chinese medicine tradition. It is older than the Ayurvedic tradition. It's twice as old as the Tibetan medical tradition. It's the oldest recorded of those big traditions in writing that we have, right? And it was not understood or practiced alone. In the same way that anyone studying Ayurveda must also start to understand all of the larger pieces of cultural law that inform Ayurveda. You can't study Chinese medicine and practice it adequately without understanding something of Taoism and Confucianism. You cannot. It cannot be practiced in a vacuum, right? And so our Western tradition, one, it must be practiced inside its language of the Hippocratic tradition. And two, the Hippocratic tradition was informed by its Lao Tzus and its Buddhas, right? And there's so much law around all of that, and we've lost it. And so we consume and we consume and we consume, and we look to the east, right? We look to the jungles. We look to the indigenous peoples of the world for that which is sacred. And we forget that there is a roaring presence, a wisdom tradition in the West that is recorded and that passed through 2,500 years. And we require this in
That's why you
order
need to
to
hurry up and
meet the
finish your
soul
book.
medicine. Yes.
You need your book, Jimmy. Come on, I've been
Well, three
waiting
of them are
for it.
finished. Three of them are finished. I'm just looking for a publisher.
Awesome. Well,
One's
anyone
still a work in
listening,
progress, but I
if
have three
anyone's
finished.
listening,
Yes.
this is a publisher, has good
Help me
publishing
find
connections.
Yes.
Reach
An
out.
agent to find a publisher. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, awesome. That's exciting. I'm sure there's someone in our listening audience who knows a good publisher. So I want to circle back to the clinical space, and look, one really practical question that I have about when we contextualize and understand health as the roaring presence of soul and healing as a process of re-meeting one's soul as it is in this moment in as whole a way as possible. How do you measure progress with your clients? Because in Like in
Yes.
training as
Good.
a herbalist or naturopath, you get told, like, identify their core goal, which is usually symptom specific. Like, I want to increase my energy by 50%. And then every time they see you, you say, out of 1 to 10, how do you score your energy? Because healing is forgetting. People forget that they felt like, you know, poo bum before, and you need to support them to
Yes.
realize that the work's been effective. How do you track project progress and reflect that back to people when we're talking about soul?
Yes. So, great question. So, the starting point is that you cannot be co-opted as a therapist, as a psychotherapist or a herbalist into their wounded sense of what they are to get, what they want to get out of this, right? As the holder of law, as a holder of wisdom, when they say, I just want my rash to disappear, right? As the sole goal, right? Then our tradition, our wisdom tradition, always points us back to soul retrieval, always points us back to the roaring presence of soul. And so to reframe their goals to not just symptom amelioration, but thriving and flourishing on every level as a human being. And that can involve a productive descent into crisis, the healing crisis, right? Hippocratic medicine is understood fundamentally by the capacity to induce a healing crisis, right? That's why Parmenides said, "Give me the capacity to induce a fever, and I can heal any disease." Right? The productive creation of a crisis. Jung is sitting there on his cloud at this moment. Yes, how do I steer my clients into a breakdown? Right? And so the psychologists are just like, oh no, I want their depression and anxiety to disappear. No, no, that's not the goal of psychotherapy, right? It is healing. Where does healing take place according to our law? It takes place in the underworld, and it always involves a catabasis, a descent, right? A descent, a breakdown. What is the healing that is required of our culture? It requires a breakdown of wounded narratives, right? A breakdown of unhealthy structures. What does healing look like for our clients? Well, at some level, we could say it looks like a detox. Like, oh, I want my liver to get better, and now I have a rash. And you say, oh, good, good, you have a rash. You know, the toxic humors are being vented, and they're now on the surface rather than on the interiority. This is positive. This is a sign of progress, right? And we see this in the emergence of that Herring's law of cure, or the healing crisis, right? Of the externalization, that symptoms must be voiced. Things must come from down and come to the surface, right? So reframing what healing is and what healing looks like inside a sick culture that defines it as anti,
Mm.
right, is one of the fundamental processes of drawing a circle in the sand that creates a sacred space, right? A non-ordinary space, a space that says, I don't want to just prop you up so that you can be a better cog in the machine of
Mm.
modernity, and you can just work yourself harder and harder into the ground whilst you get shinier shoes. What I'm interested in is your thriving. I'm passionate about your thriving. Yes, I take on. That's not me diverting my. You contract me to help you with your physical symptoms, but it is reframing them inside the larger piece of health, of whole making, of
Mm.
soul making, and to heal is to make whole, and whole making is soul making, right? And so at the beginning, we need to, that piece that you said, I used to get suckered into that, right? And now I don't. I don't get suckered into that anymore. I used to get suckered into that too. So it begins with a sense of, what are we doing here? And so a part of that is the use of uh, the sacred, the use of the numinous, the use of the language of soul, because soul welcomes tragedy and heartache, right? While spirit is that transpersonal part that is a spark off the Godhead, and it's very impersonal. Then the language of soul, which is again a part of our Neoplatonic, Pythagorean, and Platonic history, our Greek history, right? Then soul is that part of you, that personal part that came to live and lust and laugh and lose, right? That came for all of that. So there's the capacity, the skill to be able to steer people out of a wounded narrative into a soulful narrative, right? And then our allies, the herbs, can really assist in that process, or we can whore them to modernity and use them as antibiotics and antidepressants.
Or the eczema herb.
Yes, that's right. And so we see this reflected. Every herbalist must encounter this. It's just like on my Instagram page, one of the most common questions is, what's a good herb for ... eczema, hemorrhoids, da da da. And it's so frustrating because it's like, there is no such thing. There is no such thing. There's many, many, many herbs that are good for eczema. What kind of eczema is it, and what kind of person has it, right? And so that question shows the pathology of like, can I have a natural aspirin, please? So that I can just continue on unchanged. Whereas the process of healing is a process. It's not a destination. It's not the magical place of far away, never, never land tomorrow where everything is perfect and solved. It is a dance. It is a soulful process, like a whirlwind, right? Like an eddying whirlpool in a river. It is a movement that takes place, right? Health is a process. It is a way of walking life's song lines. And yet our clients come to us with a broken narrative. And so the fundamental dis-ease that we are suffering from is living in an unhealthy culture, right? And that unhealthy culture produces xenoestrogens and environmental pollution and economic depression and poor nutrition and all of those things. But it's so much deeper than that. And on a podcast devoted to the sacred, then we must understand that means a huge part of our work is storytelling and re-narrativizing, right? So that we can place them into this context of where health dances and whirls. And it is very possible to be very healthy and to be making progress with new rashes emerging on your body and with new griefs emerging in your psyche. That is progress. That is positive. That is to be celebrated. Welcome them too, as Rumi would say, right? As strangers at your door.
Yeah,
yes,
all of that are forms of expression
right.
of things that are repressed, and it's in a way,
yes,
it's the repression and the stagnation, whichever kind of language you want to use it, of fluids, cellular processes, emotions, inner mental processes that cause disease, in a really basic way. And so when we see these expressions of emotions, expressions of blocked thought patterns, expressions of repressed memories. I have a client who were doing really simple work. She came to me wanting to learn. She's studying witchcraft. She's in her early 20s, and she wanted me to do sessions with her, working with plants, so she could get to know plants to use them in like a practice of ritual and witchcraft, which is awesome because there's all these witchcraft books about using plants in witchcraft. You open it up and say, yes, spells for romance, use rose, spells, like there's no actual, it's very prescriptive. It's actually quite awful. As someone who quietly identifies as a witch in my own way, I feel quite heartbroken seeing that. So she came to me to learn plants in a really deep way, to be able to use them as allies in her witchcraft work. And then try to remember, one of the herbs, anyway, we were working with herbs, and she was taking herbs for a number of weeks at a time and working with them and journaling and doing ritual with them. And about 4 weeks in, I believe it was either after passion flower or mugwort, she had all of these repressed memories come up that she had completely buried about quite serious abuse in her childhood. And I've stayed kind of just
Yes.
in, occasionally working with her. And my work often looks like during doing a card reading and having a chat, about how she's going. And the
Yes.
card reading is really supportive. It's a way that I have been very reluctant because it feels like not professional. Like I'm not, don't look like the
Yes.
professional herbalist or naturopath that I imagine I'm meant to look like. But I find for
Yes.
me, having worked with oracle cards, this particular deck for about 15 years, and using that in my own way to reshape narrative and to help my subconscious grasp new symbols and images that can reframe narrative, finding it really useful in my clinic as a tool for that exact thing you're talking about.
Yes. And so then I had the same experience every time I was traveling off to study with some Tibetan doctor or some other Ayurvedic physician or some shaman. I wanted the tricks, the secret point that resolves skin problems,
Mm-hmm.
or this herb is used for what. And it took me a long time to realize that really what the value was that was being offered by these deep practitioners that are deeply rooted in their tradition was that I was osmotically absorbing a healthier narrative, right? A wisdom about how to see the world and to see ourselves within it, right? Rather than, no, come on, I just want to know what's the special herb for hemorrhoids. I wanted all those facts. I wanted the facts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my students at my apprentice lounge are also hungry for those facts. Teach me the tricks and the facts rather than teach me the lore and the songs.
And the
Teach me the
stories.
stories and the mysteries, right? And it's those things that reframe the fundamental pathology of our culture.
Mm.
And so, in that sense of expression that you're speaking of, then our people used to speak about the world song, right? That is the world. It is a song. We are
Mm.
in the world song. It is not a clump of earth. It is, like superstring theory in some way. It is the quivering of consciousness that produces this vibrational song. And we
Mm.
participate in the chorus alongside the cicada nations and the whale tribes. And our
Mm.
participation in that chorus is at times a lament, a sacred lament for the strife that we experience, right? For the
Mm.
fact that young deers are consumed by hungry wolves and the mother is left grieving. At times our participation is a lament, and that is how it should be. In the
Mm.
same way that the Confucians argued with the Buddhists and said, anger is not a poison, outrage is the appropriate response to outrageous events.
Mm.
Grief is not a failure. It is not a failure. It is our participation in the world song, and we are to give voice to it. And we give voice to it in our hearts and our souls, and we give voice to the pain of Mother Earth, right? And the pain of being, the unbearable pain of being through our bodies, through
Mm.
our fibroids, through our tumors, through our fevers, through our aches
Mm.
and pains. We give voice to this. And when we participate in the world song in this way, we have health. Then, the tumor has not gone, the fever has not gone, the skin rash has not gone, but we are healed as we participate in the world song.
Mm.
And so this re-narrativization, the storytelling and the lore that is so necessary, right? It's not just about re-sanctifying herbs as herbalists. It's about reanimating the world and telling a more soulful story about about the world song and our place within it. And
Mm.
there lays health. There lays health then.
Yeah. Yeah, really an echo of that. I about 3 years ago, I started doing a fair bit, online teaching, as in something that felt really exciting and like, yeah, something that I was really drawn to. And I started off with a course called Plants for Mood and Mind. Like I was like, what do people need? Mental health. I'm going to teach plants that help you with mental health. And then it actually just evolved very naturally to go from plants for mental health towards this kind of sacred herbalism work, because what I was seeing is the part of the teaching that was really transformative, both for individuals wanting to use plants for better well-being, and for people who are herbalists or student herbalists and wanting to have those keys to support healing in clients, was actually much more about how do you stop getting more data? How do you stop just piling more information? How do you slow down and learn plants through an embodied and souled experience? So you can develop a relationship with plants and through that relationship with yourself. And this impact that I didn't expect happened where people, when I asked, oh, what's the thing that you learned? What's something surprising? They'd be like, oh, I didn't realize that it was something I was missing, but I have been completely disconnected from my intuition. But because we're doing the plant the first week of this Wild Age of Herbalism course that I'm offering, people take the plant without knowing what it is, and then we work with it intentionally. And because they're doing a practice of reflection and intuitive connection, taking notes, recording everything, coming back and we collate those notes. And when they see that they've been picking up communication or insights from their own bodies and from the plant that matches most other people in the group and speaks often very powerfully to what we know about that plant in history, in mythology, in legend, and in scientific research, they start to be like, oh, that quality of listening I was doing, that is real. That's me really tuning in with my body.
Yes.
Because I didn't know if that was a stimulant, a sedative, an anti-inflammatory. I didn't know if it was a purgative, a heating, a cooling. I just picked that up so I can listen to my body. And when I listen with that particular frequency, that texture, that flavor, that is the, shall we say, spirit of the plant that I'm tapping into. And people are coming out going, wow, I can apply that through so much more of my own life because I trust myself as an authority rather than only trusting the
Yes.
internet.
Yes.
Someone wrote it on the internet, therefore that must be
Yes.
more true than this thing that I have spent like all this time slowing down and attuning to, you know?
Yes. Yes. Um,
That feels like kind of healing when we start to learn how to pay
uh,
attention to our own experience and our intuitive ability to pick up on frequencies and
yes.
resonances from other beings and from the world song, when we
And
learn to listen to the world song.
yes. And so, to me, the primary value of traditional medicine is not that it preserves forgotten and unknown treatments for warts and hemorrhoids, right? Which is where, if there's any grudging acknowledgement of phytochemistry and ethnobotany by the modern world, it's that, well, like Sweet Annie, maybe the next big anti-malarial drug is existing in one of those plants, and maybe some people happened to chance across it, right? Instead, the primary value of traditional medicine is that it holds within it a different way of seeing and being, a different way of seeing and being. And this is the medicine that traditional medicine holds for modernity. This is the medicine that indigenous peoples of the world hold for, modernity as well,
Mm.
is a different way of seeing and being, because this is the real disease. This is what is destroying the earth, and this is what is poisoning our bodies, and this is what is burdening our souls, right? Is the sick song that we are singing. And so
Mm.
to remember this as herbalists is that we have a great tendency to focus on materia medica, and most materia medicas are really written like this herb is anxiolytic, antispasmodic, da, 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 just this list of these
Mm.
things, right? As though that is its value. And when you are in an intact tradition, then the materia medica knowledge is important, but it is held inside a large body of law. And so the herbalist, as we currently understand it, is a fiction, right? A fiction of someone that practiced with plants and plants alone. When we understand that herbalists were all like root doctors, the rhizomatoi of ancient Greece, the wise women, and all of these people were first and foremost holders of wisdom, holders of law, holders of song, holders of story, holders of poetry, people that had the capacity to weave a sacred circle in the sand where transformation could take place, to create the non-ordinary spaces where non-ordinary states unfold and non-ordinary things like healing and transformation then can surprise us and happen. And so the holding just of plant law in isolation, this is a wounded, broken tradition of, oh, I know that this herb is good for this, and this herb is good for that, and this herb is good for that. Oh, you poor thing. You poor, poor thing. I have so much grief and tragedy over the fact that this is where the Western tradition, this glorious, wise, deep, soulful tradition has landed. So that Western herbalists are currently, in my estimation, the worst herbalists on the planet. Because they have suffered underneath Christianity, they have suffered underneath the Roman Empire, they have suffered underneath modern medicine, they have suffered underneath reductionism, and the law, that language that spoke in terms of pneuma, that spoke in terms of soul and fire and water, that spoke in terms of Mars and Venus, that spoke in a very different language, right? That has been stripped away, and all we have left are these phyto drugs. Right? Oh, that is insufficient to the task at hand. And practitioners who are working inside that model will not be able to assist their clients in the ways in which they hope to. They will not. Right? And it's only through the deep letting go of that. Yes.
And there's a deeper part there. I think that all of us yearn to be part of the solution or part of the healing of the culture that we live in and all the things we see around us, dysfunctional economic systems and political systems and global inequalities and ecological disasters and all of that we see. We all hope to be part of a solution to that. And I think that as a herbalist, we can be a part of that because we are. When you invite a person who comes to you for healing to engage with the living world as meaningful and rich with soul, to engage with plants as medicine and allies on the healing journey, we are inviting them to come back into relationship with life. That is a relationship of mutuality and mutual recognition. And that is so much of the disease that our culture is experiencing. But that takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to be so cross-cultural and to sit in your role as a herbalist where your training is very much the only thing you are allowed to do is say this herb for this symptom, not even diseases, not patterns. You can't touch people, you can't do body work, you can't make sure you don't counsel people, and it's like fractured off this little part of the healing puzzle. There's a lot of courage to be like, yep, you came to me for herbs for your rash, but let me tell you a story. Because what you are suffering from is so much deeper than that. And I can give you a little nudge in that direction, but you are going to have to do that hard work of finding your way back to soul.
Yes. And so all of those crises that you spoke that we yearn to contribute to, of like the heartache over the ecological crisis, the economic crisis, the socio-political crisis. Previously, I spoke of the crisis of crises as a meaning-making crisis. And to reframe that based upon what you just said, it is a storytelling crisis, right? And herbalists, if you look at our oldest herbals, then they herbs were always administered alongside charms. They were harvested with charms and prayers. They were prepared with song and prayer, and they were administered with prayer and story, always. And so the ripping off of that, right, the tearing, the sundering of that, so that then we say, here, the solution is in this bottle. Oh, that's not the medicine. The medicine is larger. It is instantiated in the collaboration of humanity and the plant, and the law and the story that the plants taught us and that we wove around the plants, right? And so the absence of that herbalists were sorcerers, enchanters. We enchanted our patients. We took them into a trance. We told them different stories through our law, right? And we said, when you take this, then I want you to, as you say it, say, little when, thrice I name you, little when, be gone and leave me be. And that's a traditional Celtic one. And a wen is a little skin thing, right?
Yeah.
And that
I always
is
learn
as
so
much a
much when I
part
interview
of
Jimmy,
our
and I
tradition
always feel so
as the
expanded
knowledge
into a world
of
of
which
poetry and
ally do
clarity
you
of
draw
thought.
upon when,
It's such a pleasure to be with
right?
him, and I hope
That's
you enjoyed it too.
storytelling.
And I really
And so
recommend,
this
if you want more of
crisis,
Jimmy's
the
amazing
way in which as
teachings,
herbalists
you
we
can sign up for his
participate in the
Apprentice
healing
Lounge
of the
on
world
Patreon.
is not, although we want to participate in ways in which environmental destruction is minimized and economic disparity is leveled out, is that if we understand that the crisis of crises is a storytelling crisis, that it is through telling different stories and holding different stories and digging not just into our books to discover, oh, this plant was used for red skin conditions, right? But also that this plant existed when Zeus wept tears for the absence of Persephone, and those tears landed upon the earth, and out of that sprung this herb. And inside that myth, a medicine, right? A guidance exists. And so we must elevate, we must sublimate our current notion of a medicine, which is a drug, which is just a pill or a potion, to see that all is medicine. All is medicine. Prayer is medicine. Story is medicine. Fever is medicine. Heartache is medicine. Divorce is medicine. Death is medicine.
Yeah.
And silence is medicine too.
There's so much more I could say, but I'm going to leave it there because silence is medicine, and that's already so rich and juicy. And we can just do this again sometime.
Absolutely. I would love to. Thank you so much for holding a space for storytelling. This that you're doing here is a medicine. It is healing, right? It cannot be bottled. But the deepest and most sacred of our medicines can never be bottled, right? Medicine with a capital M, medicine power. It existed. The plants capture some of it for us, but it existed always. It exists in the totality. So thank you, Stephanie. Like, sacred herbalism is a deep and beautiful medicine. Thank you for holding the space and inviting storytelling the way that you do.
Thanks, darling. Really appreciate that. Yeah.
You're so welcome.
Okay, just stay on for. And if you want to learn more about working with plants as allies, knowing their stories, their mythology, learning to tune into your own intuition, create relationships with plants that support healing in that deeper sense, then I'm offering a 4-month training this year, starting in March. The Wild Edge of Herbalism, and this is designed to be an initiation into plant relationships and plant storytelling, because this is the most powerful way that I have discovered that I can actually work with plants to support healing and transformation in my clients and in myself. If you're interested in learning more about this, you can book a call with me, a virtual cup of tea. The link is in the show notes, or you can just email me and I'll send you the course information booklet. That's it for this moon cycle. Thanks for joining me in another layer of this fascinating conversation we are having about the role of the sacred in our lives as herbalists. If you know someone who would love this episode, then send it through to them, as our work strengthening our herbal community through grassroots herbal education starts right here. I'll see you next time the moon is round in the sky, and until then, I wish you good health and many plants.